Namaskar. Welcome to this session. We are dealing with the sutra Dukkhanushayi Dveshaha. And we were considering that the dukkhas are of several kinds. Sharirika dukkha, manasika dukkha. That is body pain, body sorrow, mind sorrow. So when it comes to dukkham, then you have physical pain, mental pain, physical agony, mental agony. Then, if you open out it further, then you have mental pain as emotional pain and mental pain, or intellectual pain, mental pain, emotional pain. So these are various shades of dukkham, because dukkhanushayi dveshaha. Then we have concept of adibhautik dukkha, adidaivik dukkha, adhyatmik dukkha. And student of Adhyatma Paramartha Yoga should be familiar with these threefold dukkha, which is mentioned by Adhyatma. Then Patanjali mentions Paranama dukkha, Tapa dukkha, Samskara dukkha, and Gunavrutti Virodhatmak dukkha. So for students of yoga, there is a wide canvas opened out to really understand the concept of dukkha. Now, we also considered towards the end of last session that raga and dvesha, these reactions of our mind, have great kind of affinity with indriyas. So much so that it is said that they reside in senses. So we saw the verse from Bhagavad Gita 3.34. Indriyasyarthe ragadvesho vyavasthitau tayoho na vasham agachet tauhi asya paripantino. That raga dvesha reside in senses. And not to get in the gravities and clamps of these indriyas, because indriyas are not merely indriyas as cognitive organs, sensory organs. They are the place where raga dveshas reside, and they have a kind of their own domain. Senses become their own domain, and therefore not to come under the grips of senses, sensory tendencies, sensory activities, because otherwise we will be caught in the nets of raga dvesha. So about dukkha, I said we have to open out the concept of dukkha from the point of view of sharirik dukkha, manasik dukkha, adhyatmika dukkha, adidaivika dukkha, adibhautik dukkha. Then the sutra sukhanushayi ragaha dukkhanushayi dveshaha. So for raga dveshas, we have to consider the senses. And therefore, towards the end of the last session, I just made a brief mention, just the mention about the 5 forms of senses. Grahana Rupa, Swarupa Rupa, Asmita Rupa, Anvaya Rupa, Arthavatva Rupa. There are 5 forms of these senses. And it is only yoga which divulges these. And yoga has a technology towards handling these. Otherwise, we can't handle the senses and sensory tendencies. We are under their grips, we are under their mastery, they rule over us. The senses and sensory tendencies are so powerful that we cannot be doing anything, and we are just victims of sensory calls and sensory tendencies. But in yoga technology, yoga has analyzed the senses and its 5 forms. It is because for Chitta Vritti Nirodha, the Indriya Vritti Nirodha is so important. Culturing the senses, culturing the sensory tendencies, certain amount of seasoning and culturing over the senses is so important. So there are certain prayogas on the senses, because you should be aware of the fact that Ashtanga Yoga has one complete limb on senses. One of its angas, Ashtangas, Pratyahara, is completely for that aspect which is senses. It is because senses have enormous gravity over the mind, psyche, consciousness and chitta. So, the Indriyas have been thoroughly studied in the science of yoga, in philosophy of yoga, in technology of yoga. And therefore, it has a process, it has processes to equip the limb of Pratyahara, whereby the senses will come under some kind of control. In the sense, the senses can be cultured. The senses can be cosmicalized. And when the senses are cosmicalized, they won't be mortal senses under the grip of tendencies. Otherwise, the senses are having enormous tendency gravities, and they themselves in turn extend gravity on our mind and our embodiment. So, the point is, it is here that we need to consider how the senses, where these forces are residing or occupying, the senses, the Kama and Krodha, they are occupying the senses. And that's why Bhagavad Gita clearly says that Indriya and Indriyasya Artha, Indriyas and their Arthas, are the places where Raga and Dvesha are in occupancy of them. And therefore, in Raga Dvesha management, it is to be understood here that importance of some kind of yoga which is in the domain of senses, which works on senses, which cultures the senses, which cosmicalize the senses, becomes very, very important. As a matter of fact, in Adhyatma, in Paramartha, the greatest formidable foe, absolutely formidable flow, invincible flow of force is Kama. Kama means desire, lust. Now we can understand how much the senses and sensory objects have governance over our desires. Imagine, with absence of 5 senses and their functions, what would have happened to our desires? Desires would have been paralyzed. So, our desires, our lust, our Kama, it is nourished by the senses and by sensory objects. And in Paramartha, in a spiritual process, the Kama is a very, very powerful force. Desire, lust, greed. And this Kama occupies the senses. It operates from senses. It operates through the senses. It is really in occupancy of the senses. They reside in senses. This is very expressed in Yoga Shastra and Gita Shastra. Bhagavad Gita also tells us about the fact that the Kama resides in senses. It is encouraged in senses. There is afforestation of Kama, afforestation of lust, afforestation of desires in senses. So the Kama is a major antagonizing factor. And because of Kama, we have the Raga. And because of Raga, we also have Dvesha, with which we are dealing in the present sutra. Because escalation of Raga itself is Dvesha. This has been repeatedly postulated and has been repeatedly proved. So the Kama should be traced. Where is the place of Kama? In the dualities of Raga Dvesha. And therefore, the Kama has to be countered. If the Kama is countered in the sense, if the Kama is mitigated, the Kama is paralyzed, then there is a scope and chance that we will be able to handle Raga Dvesha. Therefore, Kama has been considered as a major antagonizing force. And Adhyatma has the skills and engineering and tricks to neutralize Kama, at least weaken the Kama. And so there are two ways. One is to weaken the Kama, and the other one is to transmute the Kama. And that's the trick in Adhyatma. That's called Udatti Karanam. So, it is not that we will be able to banish. It is not possible that we will be able to banish the Kama. So, the trick of the Adhyatma, trick of the Paramartha, trick of Yoga is that it should be transfigured. Transfiguration of Kama. Transmutation of Kama. So, we don't have to really banish it. And the spiritual sciences give us the kind of mode of transfiguring and transmuting Kama. It is not that it is a foe and therefore it should be annihilated, because it's a formidable force, invincible force. Oh, it is not easy to wage a battle against it and vanquish it. So the trick is that it should be transfigured and transmuted. And this comes handy, or this becomes possible at least, by satsanga, sattva sangha, santa sangha. So it's a magical spell. By satsanga, sadhana sangha, shastra sangha, ahar, vihar, achar, vichar, which are sattvika, priya, yajna, dana, tapas principle, which I have been repeatedly sounding at you, they have that magic. So, with their magic, they will transfigure and transmute the Kama rather than vanquishing it, because it is not possible to vanquish the Kama. So, that's why it is called Udatti Karanam. The Kama should be ennobled and not vanquished, because Samudra iva Kamaha. What kind of battle will you wage with ocean and its force? Ocean is after all ocean. So Kama is like ocean. This is what the Shruti tells us. Taittiriya Brahmanam. It says, Samudra iva Kamaha. Therefore, it says it is not a place that you must have a battle with it, or it is not an object with which you should battle it out. But Adhyatma gives us certain tricks to transfigure and transmute it, then it becomes a wonderful force. It becomes an ally in Adhyatma. So, with this, we should also understand that Adhyatma is not just battling and battling and battling. Vairagya is not battling and battling and battling. If you recall, during the Vairagya delineation, I told you there is transmutation, transfiguration, ennoblement of tendencies. So the Kama is so cultured that now it becomes a force which is already powerful force. Then it is made your ally, and when it is the ally to you, then it is very, very strong and potent force which joins your venture into Adhyatma. So, Kama is enemy, but nowhere Adhyatma says vanquish it, banish it, because that is not possible. It is such a strong force, and it is needless to explain how it is stronger, and there would be no second opinion about it. When we say that the Kama is a very strong force, invincible and undefeatable, formidable, no one would be having a point of rebuke. And therefore, Adhyatma is only the way, Yoga is only the way to really culture the Kama so that it becomes an ally and no longer remains an alien force. Anyway, that's why I recall a Sukta from Taitirika Aranyakam, where it is suggested that every Jnanopasaka, every Dharmopasaka, every Yogopasaka, Brahma Vrunda must be familiar with this Manyu Suktam. And in order that this is made known to people, in a daily morning ritual of twice born called Sandhya Vandanam, this Sukta has been brought in there. It's called Manyu Sukta. It comes in Taittiriya Aranyaka 10.61 and 62. And where we are told about this Kama, we are told about handling the Kama, we are told about the tricks needed to handle the Kama so that it becomes our ally. So it's a very interesting hymn from Taittiriya Aranyakam, which is part of the Sandhya Vandana mantras. Kamo Karshita Manyo Namaha, Kamo Karshin Manomaha, Kamo Karshita Kamo Karati Naham Karoti, Kamak Karta Naham Karta, Kamak Karita Naham Karaita, Eshate Kama Kama Yaswaha. Manyor Karshir Namo Namaha, Manyo Karshin Manyo Karoti, Naham Karomi, Manyo Karta, Naham Karta, Manyo Karaita, Eshate Manyoho Manyave Swaha. Oh, this is a wonderful sukta, and oblations are offered by uttering the Manyu Sukta. Manyu means anger. and a typical kind of anger. See, the wisdom of the Lord has this wonderful divergence. Otherwise, you just say anger is anger. But the anger that has reference here is based on your desire. You can get angry for several reasons. But how is that anger which is on account of your passion being shattered? When your passion is shattered, it's a typical kind of anger. And therefore, the kama and krodha, again, these are pairs. Because the krodha, understand how much it is dependent on your kama. The anger is because of desires. Desire is at the root of anger. If you don't have desires, then you won't have any room for anger. So anger has root in kama. That's what Bhagavad Gita also says, Sangat sanjayate kamaha, kamat krodho bijayate. So krodha is born out of kama. And manyu means krodha. So the kama and krodha are two forces that we need to manage. And perhaps sometimes I told you that we must read the life of great seer Vishwamitra. Life of Vishwamitra. And there he first battles kama. And then he sees that the krodha is not still gone. That means still there is seed of kama in me, therefore I get angry. And later he tries to manage the krodha. And then it is, therefore, Vedic Sukta says, first you have to work on kama. Then the krodha will go by itself. Our kama is not managed, therefore the krodha is not managed, or it is unmanaged. Because the krodha ensues from kama. So in human psychology, or even in the psychology of any being, the anger comes because of the shattering of the desire, shattering of the lust, shattering of the passion. So anger is passion based. So in Vairagya Sutra also we have to understand how important it is to get Vairagya. In the measures of it, it must work on kama. So when the kama is lessened, krodha will be lessened. Anyway, so this is the Manyu Sukta where it says, we are all motivated for activity because of our kama. We are doers, we do. It is because of desire, passion, lust in us. We do because of anger. Anger is another factor which is a great motivator of action. Therefore, unless you are angry, you don't get to doing something. Although you should not be doing the things with anger, anger is a major motivator in the maya, Prakriti Maya, that we really don't get to doing unless we are angry. And although the idealism tells us that we should not be doing anything with anger and angrily, but yet anger is the motivator for us. That is the manyu. Manyu is motivator. Kama is motivator. And we think we are doers, it is because of kama. We are doers because of it is manyu. So we start thinking that we are the doers or we get the things done. And therefore in the sukta you will come across expressions kama karta, kama karayita, naham karta, naham karayita. I don't do, I don't get it done. It is kama which is getting done. It is kama which does, and it is kama which gets done. So also is the case of manyu. I don't do, it is manyu which does. I don't get the things done, it is manyu which gets the things done. So there is also a lot of philosophy, Sankhya philosophy in this sukta. So, therefore, this is to beseech those forces of Kama that please don't trigger me. And then you can be slowly getting them around, and then you can be really culturing the Kama and Krodha, Raga and Dvesha. So, we have now concluded our study on Klesha as a Vasana. So, with this, we are coming to an end of the fourth phase of Asmita, Avidya, which is Dvesha. Dukhanushi Dveshaha. So, we considered Avidya Vasana, Asmita Vasana, Raga Vasana, Dvesha Vasana, and incidentally, we also considered our ignorance, our egotism, our attachment, and our aversion, which plays havoc on the psychological plane, mental plane, temporal plane, and empirical plane. So, it is time now that we move to the fifth and final phase of Klesha called Abhinivesha. And before going that, just a reminder that you will now understand that why yoga philosophy says, or Vachaspati particularly says, Avidya is countered by Jnana Yoga, Asmita is countered by Karma Yoga, Raga Dveshas are countered by Dhyana Yoga. Because Dhyana Yoga has that process of neutralizing the polarities of the mind, or getting the mind away from the grips of polarities, because Raga Dveshas are polarities, Sukha Dukha are polarities, and then we are drawn towards, there is attraction and repulsion, and therefore we are tossed between Raga Dvesha and Sukha Dukha. And Dhyana Yoga tries to instate neutrality of the mind. That is why Dhyana Yoga is said to be countering Raga Dvesha. And now we are coming to Abhinivesha. Abhinivesha is a kind of self-benediction, clinging to existence, and this is countered by Bhakti Yoga. The complete surrender of Bhakti Yoga helps us overcome this clinging. So, very aptly, Bhakti Yoga and Abhinivesha are connected. Because in Abhinivesha, we cling to our existence. And in Bhakti Yoga, in Bhakti, we are taught to surrender. Surrender ourselves, surrender everything of ours, and even surrender ourselves, so that the clinging tendency is mitigated, and that is Abhinivesha. Anyway, this will be considered in our next session, where we conclude the Pancha Parva Klesha. So that is enough for the time being. Namaskar all of you.